Thank you. How are you this morning? I would love for me to even have at some point, if you can let me know during the course of the day, when we first talked about this retreat, why did you feel that it was important for you to be here? After all, you are giving away a Saturday morning, perhaps a little into the afternoon as well. It'll be good for me to hear, because I think Jesus, for me, we are so star-struck these days. When there are stars like who are personalities in society or in the entertainment industry, people go crazy. And for me, I'm star-struck by Jesus, and I hope you are too, in the sense that I don't know why Jesus doesn't bring like thousands of people, because he was, as I look at it, the most brilliant mind. We think of brilliant minds, people who've done their great degrees, but here was this itinerary preacher who just was so brilliant in the way he dealt with society, he dealt with the world, built his relationship with God, brought people together, reconciled them, and finally laid down his life on the cross and died, and thought that was the best thing that he could ever do for people. Who thinks like that? And he was the first one to think that way. And so I'm just mesmerized by him, and I hope you're as well. And hence, I want to focus the next 18 minutes on trying to understand why we chose this theme, radical love, radical discipleship, at this point in time and in this point of the history of our parish. So, one of the reasons why I chose this theme is because I would like to get us back in touch with the beginning of when something like this started in our parish. It was 2009. I had just been appointed associate pastor. Father Dave was appointed pastor. Now, I had been living here prior to that in this parish, working on my master's in communication and then finally my PhD in theology. In 2008, Father Dave, who had been a pastor at St. Helen, as I said, was appointed pastor both at IC and at St. Helen. And Father Dave suggested that since I knew the parish well, that I take primary care of Immaculate while he would continue his care with St. Helen, but that, of course, he would be the pastor, but that we would work together in a way where we have separated our responsibilities so we can do them better, instead of both trying to go, and be involved with everything. Father Dave's famous phrase then was, "What does it mean to have two wives?" And I said, "Father Dave, I don't know. I don't even have one." And I guess what he was trying to say was, what does it mean to be a pastor of two parishes and love them both equally? So we were trying to figure this out. Of course, we love both equally, but we were trying to figure out, how do we function? So the responsibilities were beginning to shed, and since I was given the responsibility of kind of the administration of the parish, I have to tell you, I didn't know where to begin. So one day I took a huge poster board, and I wish actually I had brought that here with me, a huge poster board, and I created a pie chart. And I had each aspect of the parish lined up in this pie chart. So it said ministries, facilities, finances, youth ministry, liturgy, music, and I put it all together. And suddenly, the life of the parish just came in front of me, but there are some things I realized. My first realization was this, that there was no one thing that tied the various aspects of the parish together. You know what I mean? Like we were doing stuff, but there was nothing that tied all the ministries together. My second realization was that there was not one gospel theme that became a life-giving, vision-providing, purpose-driving theme for the individual parishioners or for the parish as a whole. There was nothing in our parish that could say, this is what Immaculate is about. And this is who I am supposed to be. People didn't have that. So I was convinced of two things. First, that we need a common theme for the parish as a whole. And I was convinced that common theme, that common vision needed to come from the gospel. And that's the most important thing that the Holy Spirit spoke to me about. It was not about Satish's theme. The theme needed to come straight from the gospel. Because that's what we're about, right? Now, I will share this theme in more detail in my second talk, but that year, after speaking to parish council and the staff, particularly anybody, the ETMIS, the Adult Faith Formation program over here at Immaculate, I said, let's focus on being a community of disciples. And so everywhere you see Immaculate Conception, you will see IC Parish, a community of disciples. And that's where that comes from. So the theme for 2009, 2010 was radical discipleship. So 10 years later, we want to get back to the basics. However, the word radical is radical, right? It can be misunderstood because although much of its meaning is very positive, there is also this element these days, because of where we are in society, of extremism. And yeah, we're trying to be extremists, but not in the way that some people may imagine. We are trying to be radical when it comes to the following of Jesus. And if there's one word that describes the life, the ministry, the mission of Jesus, it was love. I'll talk about that. Hence, our theme this year, radical love, radical discipleship. So that's the context of why now this theme. There is a second reason for this theme. After the first retreat, since that first retreat, we have had 440 new parishioners join the parish. Now, all those that have joined since the first retreat are now familiar that IC Parish thinks of herself as a community of disciples, because you've seen it. And that we define discipleship as think like Jesus, talk like Jesus, and act like Jesus. You've heard that, but perhaps you didn't know where we came from and why we say that. Like, why do we say think, talk, and act like Jesus? I will talk about it in my second talk a little bit more. But I believe it is time for those who have been here before 2009 and after 2009 to get back to the basics. We have to come together and rededicate our lives to this man who I call the most brilliant mind ever in human history. And together we come as a community of disciples and say to this man, Jesus, yes, we want to understand what you call us to. Yes, we want to think, talk, and act like you. I want us all to recommit ourselves to our common vision and purpose. The third reason that we have chosen this theme for this year is that this is not the easiest of times for the Catholic Church on multiple levels. First of all, organized religion is on a decline. The Christian share of the US population is shrinking. While the number of US adults who do not identify with any organized religion is growing. So, by the way, these are not non-religious people. These are not unspiritual people. They are spiritual people. They believe in God. These are not atheists. There's a word for them. It's called nuns. N-O-N-E-S. They have no affiliation. They are believing people. They believe in God, but they want nothing to do with organized religion. Now, while the drop in the Christian affiliation is particularly pronounced among young adults, it is occurring across America for all ages. The trends that we see are the same among whites, blacks, and Latinos. Among both college graduates and adults with only a high school education, and among women as well as men. So this is across the board. So a new survey done by the Pew Research Center finds that the percentage of adults 18 and older who describe themselves as Christians has nearly dropped by 8% in just 7 years. Over the same period, the percentage of Americans who are religiously unaffiliated describing themselves as atheists, agnostic, or nothing in particular has jumped more than 6 points in the same amount of time. So the number of people who are calling themselves Christians has gone down, and those who are calling themselves others is going up. So the gap is wider, right? Because the biggest loser, according to this data, is Catholicism. The other reason why we thought about radical love and radical discipleship and getting back to the gospel and getting back to Jesus is the ideological war in the church. And yes, it is a war. The last few years have been catastrophic for the Catholic Church. In the 25 years that I've been a priest, I have never seen the church so polarized. Even the most devastating tragedy of child sex abuse has not brought the church together. In other words, if we realize, folks, there's something happening, what shall we do? We are not even coming together on that which is a crisis for the Catholic Church. The child abuse scandal has been the most damaging scandal globally for the church. Globally, not just in the United States, globally. I don't think we have a count of how many innocent lives have been destroyed. And I'm sure your heart aches as badly as mine on the issue. But even a scandal such as this has not brought the church to unite. While the traditionalists blame the child abuse on homosexual priests, the progressives attribute it to clericalism and the abuse of power by bishops and priests. So these are the two ways of looking at the child abuse crisis. But it was the election of Pope Francis that has made this polarization even more intense. What is the issue? Critics of Pope Francis accuse him of diluting traditional Catholic doctrine. That is the primary argument against him. And at the center of the criticism is an encyclical on marriage that Pope Francis wrote. You know, it was called Amoris Laetitia. Now, chapters 1 to 7 of this encyclical, people are okay with. But it's chapter 8 that becomes problematic for some people, and that is the only chapter that people talk about. What's the issue? The issue for the critics of Pope Francis are people who are divorced but then have gotten married. Should they be allowed into the church for communion or not? And that's the question. Pope Francis provides divorced couples who find themselves in complex situations. In other words, not everybody's reality is the same. People who live in complex situations, from civil marriages the power to discern in their conscience, or the Pope allows these couples to enter into a period of discernment with the pastor. In other words, he's giving a role to the pastors to discern how shall we get these couples to be in the church rather than outside. Because I can always say, I know that you were divorced, now you are in a married relationship. Sorry, there's no communion for you. I can say that. Well, for Francis is saying this is a process of discernment. And here is what was very, very, he's giving, so some people like me, for example, I see his stance as treating adults as adults. In other words, you're not a bunch of fools when it comes to morality. Each one of you have a conscience. You're not unconscionable people. I believe that every one of you here has a conscience and you love God and you love the church. And in my 25 years of my priesthood, I have seen many, many, many folks hurting from not being able to receive communion, even though doctrinally they may be not there yet. But in terms of the love for God, gosh, they love God as anybody else. So what shall we do with doctrine? That is the whole question. And Pope Francis is saying that we need to enter into a dialogue with these couples, discern with these couples what it means for them to be in communion with the church, and that they could probably receive communion as well. As I said, some people like me see Pope Francis' stance as treating adults as adults who have the ability to make conscientious decisions, understanding the uniqueness of each couple, respecting the Vatican II understanding of the sanctity of the conscience, and creating a path for couples to be in communion with the church while they engage in the process of getting things right. And it could be an annulment, could be a convalidation, and all these things. Critics argue that this provides a way for couples to disregard Catholic doctrine. And that's the problem here, that Pope Francis is giving leeway to couples to violate Catholic doctrine. Now, Pope Francis does care about doctrine. He's not saying doctrines don't matter. But here is what you should understand. At the center of his papacy is the human person. You understand the difference? The difference is, what is at the center? Is it doctrine or is it the human person? And in this, I believe that Pope Francis imitates Jesus. When Jesus was asked why his hungry disciples were plucking grains of wheat and eating it on Sabbath, Jesus said to them, the Sabbath was made for man, not man for Sabbath. And the Pharisees were very angry with him. So too for Francis, doctrine was made for man, not man for doctrine. This does not mean that doctrine is not important. No. Of course it is. We are Catholics. We have doctrines that guide us through our faith. However, doctrine is meant to save the human person, not exclude the person from communion with God. We have to help human persons to get to God rather than create obstacles for them. So some critics that include powerful cardinals have taken it on themselves to topple the Francis papacy. The most blatant example of this was Cardinal Vignau's letter accusing Pope Francis of knowing facts about child abuse by Cardinal McCarrick and not acting upon it. He was the Archbishop of Washington, D.C. I'm sure you read all about it. So Vignau said that Pope Francis knew about it and he didn't do anything. In the United States, there is an organization called Militant Catholic, run by Michael Voris. And there is also the Canada-based LifeSite News. Together, they published an open letter accusing Pope Francis of heresy. It was an open letter. It was about 60 people signed up. And this is a reality today that some Catholic bishops today are bent on seeing the back of Pope Francis. So we are a very polarized, divided church. As you can imagine, this has indeed done much damage to the Catholic Church. As a priest, I have been affected by this polarization in the church. Now, typical of me, even though I have all my PhDs and all my degrees and my doctrine, I'm actually a very simple guy. I don't go to books. I go for reasons. But the book that I go to is the gospel. In other words, if you are a confused Catholic, and if you have questions to ask today, you're not going to get the correct answer because the answer depends on what you're reading. We are that polarized. Those on the traditional side will go to their set of literature. Those on the progressive side will go to their set of literature. We are still hearing different answers. We're not hearing the common answers. The only common book, I believe, that nobody argues about are the Gospels. So typical of me, I head to the gospel. I turn to the person of Jesus Christ. I believe that in this time and in this day, we as a parish community must turn to the gospel of Jesus Christ. And lastly, the political divide in the church. The church is also divided politically. My experience is that the one issue that Catholics share a common bond of is life in the womb. I think we all agree that every human person from the moment of conception is a child of God. In all the years that I have been a priest, I haven't had a Catholic who comes to me and says that abortion is okay. There may be people who have procured an abortion, but they know that was morally wrong, and so they come to the confessional. I think Catholics have a deep sense of life and protecting life from the womb. But that's pretty much it. Beyond that, Catholics are politically divided on capital punishment, on just wages, on the role of wars in global politics, on economics, on the LGBTQ presence in the church, on the place of divorced couples in the church, on immigration, on racism, on climate change, on gun control, on married clergy, on the role of women in the church, and every possible issue, Catholics are divided politically. As I said, in moments like this, I have always returned to the gospel. Because the reason for the church of Jesus Christ, because for the reason for the founding of the church is Jesus Christ and the gospel that he preached. In times like these, I believe that we have to become a gospel-centered church. In moments like this, we have to rally around the one who founded us. The Republicans didn't found the Catholic Church. Neither did the Democrats. Jesus Christ did. And that's where we have to rally. And we have to understand his gospel. Not said by anybody, just for what we read it. Just for what we read it. And I believe that the gospel is about the radical life of a man who dedicated his life to radical love. I want to repeat that. The gospel is about the radical life. Believe me, by the time he was 33, they couldn't stand him no more. That's how radical he was. So when I got 33, when I became 33 years old, I had a crisis. I'm doing something wrong. I have not been killed yet. I believe the gospel is about the radical life of a man who dedicated his life to radical love. Hence, we are heading to this theme right now. Radical love, radical discipleship.